In the 2022 Christmas holiday, I was painting some Massive Darkness 2, and just received my first wave core box for Marvel Zombies, and I was quite invested in any Marvel related stuff. I found out about a new game just released called Midnight Suns. I really like the deck building and turn-based combat of the game. The continuous research mechanics, unlocking new abilities, experimenting with different builds and exploring the Abbey was really cool. And as most players, I hated the friendship simulator because it was extremely boring. Anyway, overall the game was quite good and I enjoyed my time with it. I remember when I first saw the trailer for the Fallen Hulk, I was really impressed by it. So I thought, why not make a cool conversion of the Immortal Hulk and make it into the Fallen Hulk? So I asked Mrs. Laborc to help me out because she is awesome with green stuff. I made a longer time-lapse video for my Patreon page. If you are interested in that process and like to support the channel, head over there and also give a follow to Mrs. Laborc on Instagram, please. Both links are in the video description. Okay, so we have this awesome conversion. It's time to paint it. First, I primed the mini with Vallejo's Mecha Black Primer. I like to use black for almost every mini I paint because it helps to create a high contrast paint job if you don't use the maximum opacity of the paint with your first couple of layers. I apply the first base coat with an airbrush. The compressor is set to 3 bar and the consistency is 1 part paint and 1 part thinner. I mostly aim with my airbrush from the top, so it will create an organic gradient all over the mini. I build up the opacity layer by layer and cover all the green parts of the skin. If you don't have an airbrush, you can do this with a brush as well if you use thin layers, but it will be a slower process. I apply the paint with small bursts from the airbrush and I always make sure that the new layer is applied over a completely dried surface. This way the result will be nice and smooth like Granny's butt cheek. Then I cover the purple parts. If you paint a bigger mini like this without a base, it's very helpful that you wear a glove because you're less likely to scrape off the paint with your nails and fingers. Although I do recommend painting it with a base because even with gloves, some paint came off during my session and I had to repaint those parts numerous times. And it probably didn't help that I take off my gloves. But I'm not worrying about overspraying the purple over the green parts because the layers are quite thin and the dark purple works great for the shadows. For the first highlight, I use a higher value green with more yellow in it to achieve a mid-tone that represents Hulk's vibrant skin tone. I aim these highlights from the top and build up their opacity over time. I focus the highlights on the chest, face and arms, but I make sure that some of the previous layers show through. One side effect of the airbrush is that it mattes down the surface and you can't really achieve maximum opacity, so I switch to a brush and break up the homogeneous matte texture. I follow the muscle fibers with my brushstrokes. I paint the model like light is coming from above, so I just emphasize the highlights that are already created with the airbrush. I also use stippling around the areas I like to blend and create small dots with the tip of the brush. The easiest way to do this is to use a thicker consistency, although thinner consistencies work just as fine, but if you have a similar paint with not so great coverage, a bit thicker consistency will help you. You can see that as I build up the layers, the color becomes more and more saturated, and that's what I was aiming for. The other thing I need to do is work on the smoothness. So next to the stippling, I also use some glazes to make some nice blends. I thin down the paint with a bit of water and remove the excess on a paper towel and move the paint from the lower to the higher value color. It's very important to wait between each layer to dry or I will slap on your tiny hand. If you don't wait, you can rip off some drying layers and create a rough and splotchy surface. If that happens, take a picture of your work and send it to Papa Laborc and I will go to your house when you paint and slap on your tiny hand. I do this stippling and glazing back and forth between the two green tones. Obviously, blending is one of those things that can be done for an eternity. You can use an airbrush with a more diluted consistency of paint and speed up the blending process, but I think it's very important that you don't limit your blending skills to the airbrush. On a mini with this size, you can get away with some airbrush blends, but you can't do this fine details on a true scale 32mm mini, so don't let your airbrush skills develop to a level where you can do the same with a brush, okay? Okay. Remember when I said back and forth? So we go back with some lime green and a couple of layers more of our glaze. This is going to be our foundation for the skin, so I don't mind putting in some extra time. As I said, blending is never really finished, so you just come to a point where you are done. Same when you are combing Granny's hair. You can go on forever, but she has so little hair left by now. You should probably stop before making her completely bald. To push the contrast more on the skin, I mix some off-white to the recent highlight color. This off-white is going to help us with the coverage. I drastically reduced the highlight areas all over the mini and I applied the paint with thin layers. I add some extra detail to the muscles on the chest with some thin lines following the muscle fibers. I aim the highlights toward the top half of the muscles on the hands, and the same goes for the face. I apply a little bit more of these highlights on the left, which is the character's right side, to add more direction to our light source. I'm not so crazy about the highlights on the chest because Fallen Hulk has this pattern all over his pecs, so that will help our eyes to move our focus to the details of the pattern rather than the smoothness of the blends. All the blending and desaturating the highlights with off-white colors, we lost some of that vibrant green, so I used the airbrush to reintroduce some very saturated tones. I used Tesseract Glow, which is a technical paint from the Citadel range. I guess it has technical in the name because it has some gloss medium in the paint, so if you apply it without thinning it down, it will dry to a gloss finish. Since I thinned it down with the airbrush thinner, it will mute it down to a satin finish, but any greenish yellow could work. You don't have to use the exact same paints, obviously. For his tongue, I used a very dark red paint as a base, and I painted the eyes with ice yellow off camera. I highlighted by mixing some off-white to it for a more pinkish tone and highlight mostly one side of the tongue. Using the same paint, I covered the teeth one by one, leaving a little bit of black between each tooth to make them more separated and defined. When I'm holding the mini, I try to get the most optimal angle so I can reach the teeth without staining the lips. I also cover the flames between the horns. I cover the horns with dark brown. To highlight them, I mix some ice yellow to the brown and paint the grooves of the horn with some thin layers. I gradually add more ice yellow to push the values on the horn. After that, I cover the flames with Tesseract Glow, using the airbrush. To make the flames a little bit hotter, I highlight the root of them with some thin layers of ice yellow. Now I really want to glue the mini to the base, so I won't scrape off the paint from it anymore. So I get the dry brush and cover most of the base with some cold desaturated green. I roughly apply it all over the surface. I choose this color because I want to make something similar where you first encounter the Fallen Hulk in the game. This cold rocky base with some vibrant glowy greens. Now with white, I cover some of the cracks of the base to have a value sketch. I go around all over the sides and between the larger slabs. I switch to a dry brush to get the texture of the slabs and add some more details to the flat parts. Once again I use tesseract glue and spray over the white parts for a glowy look. I apply some green to the areas that are close to the tesseract glow layer to build up the glow effect more. I use thin layers and stippling to create some texture over the rocky surface. I'm not glazing or aiming to have any smooth blends to create a contrast for texture between the smooth skin and the rough base. I use the dry brush to highlight the parts that are not affected by the glow. The consistency in the brush is not completely dry, but I remove most of the paint on the paper towels so I can create these patterns thanks to the unique bristles these brushes have. To push the contrast, I use sybarite green, and once I remove the excess, I just gently touch the surface with the brush to apply the paint. With the same technique, I apply some gauss bluster green and focus around the edges of the rock slabs. This time, the brush is more dry and have less paint between the bristles. I hope no one is bored of stippling, because this is going to be a stippling festival. You see, the character has these little spots where the purple skin meets the green parts. So I painted these spots organically between the two colors. Closer to the purple parts, I tried to make the pattern more dense and gradually loosened up the dots towards the green. I did the same for the claw-like pattern on his chest. The symbol is fading towards the lower pec muscles, so I know I don't want to make solid lines over the chest because it would create the effect that it's freshly painted on the Hulk rather than a natural skin pattern. I marked the starting point of the claws at the top of the chest and stippled my way through the shapes. I think it's way easier this way, and I think the end result looks more or less symmetrical. After that, I painted the pattern on his skirt with green, using a base layer consistency and applying the paint with small vertical brush strokes. These are more of a drop-like pattern, so the purple organically blends in, so it's not like these green beavers are clean stripes on his skirt. I mix some off-white to the purple to highlight the skirt. I leave some of the dark purple to show through between the grooves, so I don't get rid of the texture this way. If I do, I go back with the previous purple to fix it. I wanted to make the spotty patterns over the highlight areas more integrated, so I glazed over the last highlight color of the skin. This made them more faded and organic. I mixed some more ice yellow to the purple to highlight the purple skin parts a little bit more, and eventually went overboard with the ice yellow, but that was too much. Since the reference picture has these very bright fill lights, it gave me the impression that some of these parts are shiny, but it's just a very bright fill light effect, so it doesn't really make sense to paint these bright highlights over the mini. Later I muted this with the second mixture of the ice yellow and purple. I wanted to diffuse the satin finish that the tesseract glow created, so I applied a matte varnish over the mini. It's 1 part thinner and 1 part varnish, and the compressor is set to 5 bar. I applied the varnish with small bursts. One tip if you are new to varnishing: always apply the varnish with thin layers. If you apply too much on the surface, it's going to dry to a glossy finish even if you use matte varnish. Then I painted the edge of the base black. The reason I did this after the varnishing is because black dries to a satin finish and it looks nice next to the matte surface. Lastly, I draw the iris with a Pigma micron pen and glaze some tesseract glow over the eyeballs to get that green eye Fallen Hulk has. With that, Fallen Hulk is done. If any one of you interested to have this mini in your MCP team, give Papa Laborc a message on Instagram or Facebook. A huge thanks to my Patreons who support this kind of videos, with special shout out to Jonathan Rhodes, Cold-Blooded Dom, Trying to Paint Minis, Jonathan Mosner, Glitchy Macrash, Guillaume Belanger, and Penoman45. If you guys are interested in some exclusive content and PDF guides, or like to vote on which mini should I paint next, or just want to support my work, please consider joining my Patreon page. The link is in the video description. And as always, I hope your day will be as smooth as a granny's butt cheek.